For 12 weeks, our class had the opportunity to work with students in Mr. Chandler's class. With these experiences, I am able to reflect on how Matt's students learned from their participation in the activities in his classroom. This project is connecting those experiences to brain-based learning. The primacy-recency effect is the phenomenon when we remember what comes first and what comes last in a learning episode. The information in the middle is much more difficult to retrieve. If it is proven that we are most likely to remember the beginning and ends of something, then why don't we create more of these? Mr. Chandler responds to this by breaking up class time into shorter and more engaging segments. This allows his students to be extra focused for a shorter period of time. After a lesson, they get a transition period when they can move around and prepare for the next lesson. A mnemonic device is a word or phrase used for remembering unrelated information, patterns, or rules. Most of these are a verbal or visual learning aid. Mnemonics rely on associations between easy-to-remember constructs which can be related back to the data that is to be remembered. This is based on the principle that the human mind is much more easily capable to remember spatial, personal, surprising, or even humorous information than arbitrary sequences. Mr. Chandler used a visual mnemonic device called a kipo. To an uninformed observer, it appears to be a piece of string, but this kipo is actually helping students remember facts about different places. Hanging off of one main string were several different colored strings. Each bead represented a new topic, while the knots surrounding it were various facts. I was impressed that the students could relay back to us what each knot and bead meant. Bloom's taxonomy is a way to classify instructional activities or questions as they progress in difficulty. The lower levels require less in a way of thinking skills. As one moves down the hierarchy, the activities require a higher level of thinking. There are 6 levels within the cognitive domain, from the simple recall or recognition of facts as the lowest level, or through the increasingly more complex and abstract mental levels to the highest order, which is classified as evaluation. I feel that Mr. Chandler uses Bloom's taxonomy as he encourages his students to move through these levels of thinking. After his students remember the introduction to a topic, he strives for them to reach that understanding piece. Following this is the application of new skills and further analyzing. During his math lessons, he encourages students to try the harder problems, but leaves this option open. He wants them to become more comfortable with their abilities so that they can work through this pyramid. There are 4 ways to creating memories. They include emotion, attention, repetition, and thinking about meaning. You'll remember information more easily if you can visualize it. For example, if you want to associate a child with a book, try not to visualize a child reading the book because that's too simple and forgettable. Instead, come up with something more exciting, something that sticks, as in the child being chased by the book. It's your mind, so making the images as shocking and emotional as possible will keep those associations strong. When Mr. Chandler was teaching about the different types of maps, he included these 4 characteristics in his lesson. The emotion piece came from the laughter and humor of watching him draw on Kelly's face. When he was doing this activity, it intrigued students and kept them interested in what they were doing, gaining their attention. He had taught them and kept reinforcing that repetition piece, followed by the students thinking about what they learned in the lesson. Specialization is the notion that certain brain regions are mainly dedicated to accomplishing a specific task. Possibly our greatest specialization as humans is that we've developed ways to communicate with other members of our species. Although there is a considerable amount of work to be done before a general model of lateralization can be formulated, there have been some breakthroughs. Simply put, the 2 halves of the brain appear to address opposite phases of directional processes. While the left brain can take care of things such as pulling things apart, the right side of the brain appears to be better at assembling. The best thing Mr. Chandler does to reinforce this is to allow their brains to operate the way they do best, which is with interactions among their peers. Students will learn when they're able to discuss subjects with their peers. He also feeds the hunger for visual stimulation by presenting every lesson with something visual. Most of the time, in a typical classroom setting, students are involved only in passive learning. This includes listening to the instructor, looking at the occasional overhead slide, or just reading from the textbook. But research shows that passive involvement generally leads to a limited retention of knowledge by students. This is indicated in the learning pyramid. When only lecture is being used, students only retain 5% of the information. However, once verbal and visual processing are combined, the average retention rate increases. It is when students are engaged in doing that they are able to retain the most information. Mr. Chandler hardly ever lectures and includes a picture or some kind of visual for every lesson. During our Earth activity, students had the demonstration piece and the opportunity to discuss with their groups as we went along. Because this lesson was hands-on, they were practicing by doing and therefore retaining more of what we were teaching them. Transfer is the influence that past learning has on new learning and the degree to which the new learning will be useful in the learner's future. Positive transfer aids and negative transfer aids inhibit the acquisition of learning. Transfer is the core of problem solving, creative thinking, and all other higher mental processes. While Mr. Chandler's students were learning about maps and topography, he gave them a creative hands-on problem to solve. The students used their previous knowledge about geography and acquired new observational skills while assembling the large 3D map. Constructivism is a theory of learning stating that active learners use past experiences and chunking to construct sense and meaning from the new learning, thereby building larger conceptual schemes. When the students learned about consumption of resources among the continents, they were surprised to see the results. This interactive lesson is sure to be a building block to their environmental education. Here is a basic model of memory. The environment includes everything that is happening in Mr. Chandler's classroom, like the processing, disposal, and retrieval of information. It includes actively monitoring incoming information and behaviors. Information in the short-term memory is retained long enough to use it, such as looking up a telephone number and remembering it long enough to dial it. The long-term memory, however, provides the lasting retention of information from minutes to a lifetime. Long-term memory appears to have an almost limitless capacity to retain information, but it can never be measured as it would take too long. The term brain lateralization refers to the fact that two halves of the human brain are not exactly alike. Each hemisphere has a functional specialization, some functions whose neural mechanisms are located primarily in one half of the brain. It is said that people can actually be left or right brain depending on which side they prefer. The left side of the brain takes care of analytic thought, language, science, and math. The right side functions holistic thought, intuition, creativity, art, and music. Mr. Chandler takes this into consideration because his lessons are directed at both sides of the brain and therefore can appeal to everyone.